The fridge's low hum was the only sound as I read the contract where my husband signed away my inheritance. Still, I kept my hand on the cool handle, holding myself steady. As the hum deepened, it felt like our entire marriage was vibrating apart in my ears. While that sound filled the kitchen, I finally heard every lie he'd spoken beneath it. The same low hum followed my breath as I realized he never wanted a wife. He wanted a wallet with a pulse. That's when I closed the fridge and decided our relationship ended the moment he sold my future. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The last thing he said before slamming the door behind me was, "Take your dead father's junk with you." His voice echoed in the narrow hallway, sharp enough to sting. A second later, my suitcase hit the porch with a heavy thud, wheels scraping against the concrete. His wedding ring, still snug on his finger, caught the porch light for a split second before the door shut between us. The night air hit me like a slap. It was colder than I expected, that thin end-of-winter chill that settles into your bones. The porch light buzzed above me, flickering in a way that made everything feel unstable. I stood there in leggings and an oversized hoodie, my breath puffing out in uneven clouds, clutching a half-zipped suitcase that felt lighter than it should have. Maybe because I packed in a panic. Maybe because I didn't think he'd actually throw me out. Ethan stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, face hard like he'd already decided which version of me he wanted to believe. The nagging wife, the ungrateful woman, the cheap burden. His silhouette looked unfamiliar, almost like a stranger wearing my husband's body. The argument had started like all the others, quietly, then sharply, then all at once. I'd asked about the missing savings again, the transfers that didn't show clear labels, the credit card charges at restaurants we'd never been to, and the cash withdrawals near a casino 2 towns over. Every time he said I was overreacting. Tonight, he went further. "You don't contribute enough to question me," he snapped, while digging through the junk drawer, pretending he wasn't avoiding my eyes. "Your tiny paycheck doesn't give you authority to audit my life." Audit. Like I was some corporate pest instead of his wife. I reminded him I work as a bookkeeper. Managing other people's money is literally my job. He laughed at that, short and mean. "Playing with receipts isn't the same as paying real bills, Grace." Hearing him say it made something twist in my stomach. That old shame I never should have carried, but somehow always did. Every time I tried to read our joint statements, he'd position himself behind me, correcting my misunderstandings. Every time I raised a concern, he'd sigh loudly as if my voice was a chore. But tonight, when I brought up the casino withdrawals, his name right there on the ATM receipt, his whole demeanor snapped like a hinge under pressure. "So now you're spying on me," he barked, stepping closer, heat rising off him. "You think you get to monitor my transactions because you bought groceries twice this month?" "That's not fair," I whispered, but even I could hear the tremble in my voice. "Fair?" He scoffed, hand slicing the air. "I work 60 hours a week. I pay for this house. I pay for your car. I pay for everything. You don't get to interrogate me like some IRS agent." The escalation happened in seconds. Accusations, raised voices, the metallic slam of a drawer, the sound of him dragging my suitcase out from the closet. He shoved clothes into it haphazardly, not caring what he wrinkled or forgot. My toothbrush clattered against the zipper as he yanked it closed. "I'm done with this drama," he said, words landing like cold stones. "You want transparency? Go cry to Daddy for it." My father had been dead for 3 years. Ethan knew how that wound sat in me, tender, unhealed, and he used it anyway. Then came the shove. Not to me, but to the suitcase. Dragged to the door, tossed onto the porch like I was a guest who overstayed her welcome. I followed it in disbelief, still trying to negotiate with someone who'd already stopped listening. He didn't even wait for my reply before locking the deadbolt. The sound of the latch sliding into place cut deeper than the cold. Through watery eyes, I watched his shadow move down the hallway, the hall light flicking off behind him without hesitation. And just like that, Silence. No footsteps returning, no apology, no second chance. I stood there with my purse slipping off my shoulder and my father's old worn leather wallet peeking out of the side pocket of the suitcase. The one thing of his I kept close even now. The leather looked darker under the buzzing porch bulb, familiar and steady in a night that suddenly wasn't. Shivering, I pulled out my phone and checked my own debit card balance. Almost nothing. The number blurred through tears and embarrassment. I'd let myself become that woman, financially dependent, underinformed, told repeatedly that I just didn't get it. Feeling stupid and desperate, I slid my dad's old bank card out of the wallet and slipped it into the back of my phone case. It felt heavier than I remembered, probably expired, probably inactive, probably useless. But standing there with my whole life zipped into a single suitcase, I told myself one thing. It probably doesn't even work, but tomorrow I'm going to try it. The clerk didn't even bother looking up when he said, "Card declined." His voice floated out flat and bored, like he'd said the same thing 100 times that day, but the shame still burned through me so sharply I felt myself shrink. It was past midnight, and the motel lobby smelled like bleach and fried onions, an odd mix that clung to the inside of my throat. A humming vending machine near the wall flickered every few seconds, casting harsh, jittery light over the scuffed counter, separating me from the clerk who clearly wished I'd vanish. I pressed my thumb against the edge of my debit card, praying for a miracle. I checked the balance outside in the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine ticking as it cooled, hoping maybe Ethan's last-minute withdrawals hadn't emptied it completely. But now, watching the clerk's hand move lazily toward the card reader, I felt the truth before he even swiped. Declined. Again. He let out a long, annoyed sigh. One of those theatrical exhales people use when they want you to know you're wasting their time. "Want to try another?" he asked, monotone, eyes still glued to the computer screen. Behind me, a man with a backpack shifted impatiently, keys jingling in his hand. I swallowed hard. My purse felt painfully light, almost mocking. The only other card I had was one that shouldn't even count, my father's old bank card. I'd tucked it into my phone case earlier like a child pressing a lucky penny into her pocket. It wasn't supposed to work. It was sentimental, a relic. But now, desperation made me clumsy. I fished it out with trembling fingers. The plastic felt different from modern cards, thicker, the embossing deeper. The name faded from years in my dad's wallet. The edges were worn smooth by his hands. I stood there for a moment, just staring at it, my throat tightening. "Try this?" I said, half joking, half pleading. Even I didn't know which half was winning. The clerk finally looked at me, just long enough to register that I was another broke woman in a hoodie needing a room for the night, then took the card and swiped it. The machine didn't beep its usual decline tone. Instead, the screen lit up with a loading bar. The clerk leaned forward, squinting, his brows pulled together in a way that wasn't bored anymore. He glanced at me, then back at the screen. Then, without saying anything, he reached for the black phone next to the register and dialed a number from a small laminated card taped to the counter. "I need to call this in," he muttered. The man behind me sighed loudly, shifting his weight. I hugged my suitcase closer, trying to ignore the heat building in my cheeks. Shame is strangely physical. It prickles across your skin like static. The clerk spoke quietly into the receiver, leaving long pauses, nodding like whoever was on the other end could see him. Then he held the phone out toward me. "They want to talk to the card holder." My stomach dropped. "He's dead," I said softly. "The card belonged to my father." The clerk shrugged, barely caring. "They still want you to talk." I pressed the phone to my ear. The cord felt sticky, like too many hands had touched it. A calm, professional woman's voice came through. "Ms. Miller, this is Marion from the bank's private client department." Private client? The words didn't fit my life. I could barely afford a motel room. "I need to verify a few details with you," she continued. "Your full name?" I gave it. She asked for my date of birth, then my father's. Each answer made the silence on her end stretch a little longer, like she was checking something she didn't expect to find. Finally, she exhaled softly. "Ms. Miller, we've been trying to reach you for some time. There are matters concerning your late father's account that we need to discuss, in person, as soon as possible." For a moment, all I could hear was the buzz of the vending machine behind me and the distant slam of a car door outside. My suitcase handle dug into my wrist, grounding me in the moment even as my mind spun. "Okay," I managed. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," she said. "If you can come to the downtown branch, I'll be available." I nodded instinctively, forgetting she couldn't see. "I'll be there." When I handed the phone back, the clerk simply returned my father's card. No explanation, no approval, no denial. Just a strange look, like he wasn't sure who he'd been talking to anymore. I wheeled my suitcase out of the lobby, feeling unsteady, the night breeze slipping under my hoodie. I had no idea what I'd just stepped into. I only knew one thing. This old card, this useless sentimental thing, had just opened a door I didn't even know existed. And tomorrow morning, whatever waited behind it was about to blow up the life Ethan had thrown me out of. The motel sheets felt like they were woven out of old napkins, scratchy, stiff, and thin enough that I could feel the springs of the mattress pressing up through them. I lay on my back, staring at the water-stained ceiling while the sound of a neighbor's TV bled through the wall, some late-night infomercial rhythmically rising and falling like my own uneven breathing. My suitcase sat open on the carpet, half unpacked, like even it wasn't sure I'd stay. But what kept me awake wasn't the noise or the smell, a mix of cigarettes poorly masked by floral air freshener. It was the word Ethan always used on me: cheap. The irony of it pulsed through my mind like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. I opened my banking app with a trembling thumb, the motel's weak Wi-Fi making the numbers load painfully slow. When they finally appeared, I felt that familiar punch in my chest, nearly zero, just enough for a gas station coffee if I was lucky. I wanted to cry, but the tears felt stuck somewhere behind my ribs, clogged by exhaustion and rage. My mind drifted to all those grocery store trips. The fluorescent lights, the beeping scanners, the way Ethan would toss things into the cart without looking at prices. Artisan cheeses, steaks, imported snacks, craft beer. "We deserve nice things," he'd say, like it was romantic. But the second I'd glance at a price tag or mention a coupon, he'd sigh dramatically and call me grandma, like budgeting was some outdated hobby. He made it sound like I was embarrassing him by caring. He always had a way of turning responsible into ridiculous, and yet somehow I ended up paying for so much, quietly covering overdraft fees he pretended not to see, handling groceries and utilities from my tiny paycheck, all while he strutted like the big provider. The TV in the next room grew louder. Someone laughed. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes, but instead of darkness, I saw Ethan standing in our kitchen, that smug expression I once mistook for confidence. "You should let me handle the real finances," he'd say, tapping his temple like he was imparting wisdom. "Your brain just isn't built for big numbers." Big numbers. I literally keep books for 3 small businesses. But apparently, I was too delicate to understand our checking account, too emotional, too forgetful, too female. That was the subtext he never had to say out loud, and slowly, my access disappeared. First, he updated the password and forgot to tell me. Then the bank app glitched. Then statements stopped arriving in the mail. Every time I asked, he had a new explanation. He'd pat my shoulder, kiss my forehead, and tell me not to stress about things I didn't get. But I had gotten it. I just ignored the sinking feeling. At one point, I'd even suggested going full-time at work, picking up another client or 2. He'd leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and told me I didn't believe in him, that my job was to keep our home running smoothly so he could focus on his future. He made it sound noble, like I was sacrificing for our team. I gave up a promotion for him, a promotion, a raise, benefits, a chance to be more than the background character in his story. And then there were the family dinners, his mother passing dishes like she was auditioning for a 1950s commercial, Ethan making jokes about how I was lucky. He understood money. Grace didn't exactly inherit financial genius, he'd say, just sentimental clutter. His mom laughed every time. I laughed too, cheeks burning, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending that marriage meant swallowing that kind of disrespect. Now, lying in this motel bed with a lamp that buzzed faintly and a pillow that smelled like disinfectant, I turned my head toward the bedside table. My father's old bank card sat there, the plastic catching the warm, amber light. It looked out of place in a room like this, like it belonged to a different life, a safer one. I reached for it, running my thumb over the faded lettering. My throat tightened. If there's anything left, anything at all, I whispered to the empty room, he's not getting near it. Not 1 cent. The card didn't respond, but somehow its solid weight in my hand made it easier to breathe. Today I know that moment was the first time I chose myself, and the last time Ethan's voice outweighed my own. The glass doors whooshed open, and for a second I thought the cold air inside the bank might actually push me back out onto the sidewalk. The marble lobby stretched wide and glossy under the morning lights, the kind of space that seems designed to make you aware of every flaw you're dragging in with you. And I had plenty. Same clothes, same hoodie, same exhaustion from the night he threw me out. I felt like the words homeless, unwanted wife were stamped across my forehead in ink only security guards could read. A man in a tailored navy suit walked past me, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor, the smell of expensive cologne lingering behind him. A woman in heels typed on her phone as she moved toward the elevators, her bag worth more than my car. Everyone in the building looked like they belonged. I clutched my worn purse tighter, feeling the frayed strap rub against my palm. The air smelled faintly of coffee. Good coffee, not the burnt motel kind. And something floral, maybe someone's perfume drifting through the space. It made my clothes feel even more stale. I smoothed a hand over my hoodie, knowing it wouldn't help. When I reached the reception desk, the woman behind it looked up with a polished, professional smile. Her eyes flicked down to my outfit, quick, almost reflexive, before darting back up. She forced her smile wider. "Good morning. Name, please." "Grace Miller," I said, hoping my voice didn't shake as much as it felt. She typed something, then nodded. "Ms. Miller, Ms. Blake is expecting you." She said it politely, but I caught the slight hesitation before the last sentence, like she didn't quite believe someone dressed like me could have an appointment with a private banker. My cheeks heated. Before I could respond, a woman stepped out from a hallway to the left. "Grace?" she asked, voice warm. Marion Blake looked like the embodiment of competence. Mid-50s, crisp charcoal suit, short silver-streaked hair, minimal jewelry, eyes that actually saw the person she was talking to. When she extended her hand, she did it without hesitation, without the slightest change in expression at my clothes. She shook my hand like I mattered. It almost broke me. "Let's go somewhere private," she said gently. I followed her through a glass-paneled corridor into an office overlooking the city. Sunlight bounced off the buildings outside, casting soft reflections across her desk. Everything in the room felt intentional, organized, clean, steady. I lowered myself into a leather chair that quietly sighed under my weight. Marion sat across from me, folding her hands. "Before we get into the technical details, I'd like to ask about your father. When did he pass?" 3 years ago, I said. My fingers twisted the strap of my purse automatically. "Lung complications, he worked here, didn't he?" She nodded. "For many years. Everyone respected him." She paused. "After he passed, did anyone from the bank meet with you, review his accounts, the estate?" I blinked. "No, I thought there wasn't anything to review. My husband handled most of the mail at the time. I swallowed. I was barely functioning those first months. Compassion flickered in her expression, but it sharpened quickly into concern. "That's unusual. Very unusual." She turned her monitor slightly, not enough for me to see anything yet, just enough for me to know she was looking at something significant. Her brows knit together. "Grace," she said quietly, "you mentioned on the phone that you believed your father didn't leave much behind." I nodded. "Just some savings, enough to cover the funeral. A bit left over that went to final bills." Marion hesitated in a way that made my stomach twist. Then she said, "That's not the picture I see here." My pulse thudded in my ears. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she leaned back slightly and studied me, not suspiciously, but carefully, like she was piecing together a puzzle, and I was one of the missing pieces. "Before I explain," she said, "I need to ask something important, and I'm asking not to accuse anyone, but to protect you." I nodded slowly. "Has anyone in your life discouraged you from coming to talk to us about your father? Or suggested there was nothing here worth looking into?" Ethan's face flashed through my mind, his casual dismissals, his hand waving away my questions, his quick explanations that somehow always made me feel foolish. A cold wave rolled through my chest. My mouth felt dry. "Yes," I whispered. "My husband. He always said there was nothing." Marion's expression didn't change much, but something subtle shifted, like she'd just confirmed a suspicion she already had. "Grace," she said softly, "I think something is very, very wrong." And I felt it, like the marble floor had tilted beneath me, like the truth had been sitting in a locked drawer for years, waiting for me to finally open it. Marion didn't speak at first. She simply turned her monitor toward me, slowly, deliberately, like she already knew the moment was going to hit me harder than anything else that week. The screen glowed pale blue in the morning light, the numbers crisp and unmistakable, and the very first thought that went through my mind wasn't, "I'm rich." It was, "He lied to me. He lied to me about everything." There it was, in bold black text, Harris Family Trust, beneficiary, Grace Miller, and beneath it, a balance with 2 commas. Not life-changing money for the ultra-wealthy, but for me? For the woman who couldn't even pay for a motel room the night before? It was more money than I had ever seen attached to my name. More than Ethan ever let me imagine I could have, or deserved. I stared at the screen, my breath thinning. My fingers gripped the armrests of the chair like the room might tilt. Marion sat back slightly, giving me space to absorb it. "Your father set this up over many years," she said softly. "Portions of his bonuses, a stake in a conservative development fund, and additional private contributions he didn't advertise. The trust activates upon his passing." I blinked at her. He never told me any of this." Her expression softened. "He left instructions that we were not to contact you unless his card was used. He wanted you to come to this on your own timeline, emotionally. Or," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "if you were ever in distress." I felt that word, distress, like someone pressed a cold hand to the back of my neck. "That card you used at the motel?" she continued. "It wasn't just sentimental. It was effectively a key. The moment it was run, our system flagged it and triggered a dormant alert." My heart twisted. That stupid worn card. The one Ethan sneered at. The one I kept because it smelled a little like my dad's cologne if I held it close enough. It had been waiting for me. Marion clicked to another window. "There's more you should see." A list appeared. Timestamps, notes, internal references. She scrolled through them, her jaw tightening slightly. "These are logs of inquiries made about remaining funds or unclaimed accounts in the months after your father's death," she said, "all very carefully worded, all from someone we described internally as an interested party." She clicked one. The phone number displayed was painfully familiar. My chest tightened. "Ethan," I whispered. Marion nodded. "He contacted us multiple times, never directly claiming to be a beneficiary, but probing for information. asking whether your father left anything behind that might have been overlooked. We, of course, declined to disclose anything. My mouth went dry. All those times he joked that my dad left nothing. All those moments he looked irritated when I brought up estate paperwork. He hadn't been dismissive because he believed there was nothing. He had been dismissive because he knew there might be something, and he didn't want me looking. Marion opened a scanned document next. Handwritten notes. My father's handwriting. Tidy, precise, familiar enough that my throat closed immediately. He met with me several times, she said quietly. He was concerned. I leaned forward, unable to breathe. He worried about your husband's relationship with money. He asked specifically about protective structures to prevent third parties from accessing your inheritance, even in marriage. He wanted to ensure you could never be coerced or convinced to sign anything compromising. Something inside me cracked. He never said anything. He never warned me. He didn't want to create conflict for you, she said gently. His notes mention that he didn't want you to feel pressured between loyalty to him and loyalty to your marriage. The words swam in my vision. My father, quiet, private, steady, had seen exactly what I refused to see, and he tried to protect me anyway. Marion rested her hands on the desk. Grace, I need to apologize. When we didn't hear from you, I assumed you were choosing not to engage. I didn't know someone else might have been intercepting mail or discouraging you. I let out a shaky breath. Ethan. Handling my mail. Telling me the bank had nothing. Saying everything was taken care of while he quietly checked for a treasure he hoped existed. All those times he dismissed my father as just a bean counter. All those jokes that Dad left me, nothing but old receipts. He knew. Or at least he suspected. He'd been trying to get to this money before I even knew it existed. The office chair suddenly felt too small, like it couldn't hold the weight settling in my chest. My world didn't just shift, it realigned. And for once, it did so in my favor. Marion's voice grounded me. This trust is yours alone. Its structure predates your marriage, and it is legally insulated from any marital claims. No spouse, current or former, can access it. Not as collateral, not as shared property. It is yours. I exhaled shakily, a mix of grief, relief, anger, and clarity swirling together. I would also strongly recommend, she continued, that you speak with legal counsel. I can connect you with our attorney, or you're welcome to bring your own, but you should know your financial position is far stronger than you believe. I nodded slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside me, something steady, something sharp. Ethan had thrown me out thinking I was broke, thinking I had nothing, thinking he'd won the power struggle he created. He had no idea I was sitting on the one thing he'd always wanted, and the one thing he would never touch. Alan slid the small cream-colored envelope across his desk as though it were something fragile, something alive. The paper made the faintest whisper against the wood, and I stared at the handwriting on the front. My father's handwriting. Tight, neat, familiar in a way that punched a hole straight through my chest. The date in the corner read almost exactly 1 year before he died. My throat closed. He had planned for this, planned for me, and he never told me. Alan didn't interrupt the moment. He just folded his hands, waiting, the quiet hum of his desk lamp filling the space where my breath should have been. His office smelled like old paper and strong coffee, comforting and intimidating at the same time. Framed degrees lined the walls in orderly rows, each one announcing competence in a way that made the folder in my lap feel heavier. I clutched it tighter, still half convinced that at any moment someone would walk in and tell me they had mixed me up with a different Grace Miller. Someone more important. Someone who belonged in a private attorney's office instead of a cheap motel room. Finally, Alan spoke. Your father trusted you, Grace, and he trusted me to help you when the time came. I blinked hard, pulling myself back into the moment. You were his Estate attorney? He nodded. For nearly 15 years, I drafted his will, the trust structure, the fund agreements. He was very clear about what he wanted. He turned a monitor slightly, showing a digital scan of documents, my name on legal lines I'd never seen before. The private account and the investment shares were always intended for you, explicitly. He added protective language shielding them from spousal debts, marital claims, or pressure from third parties. I let out a shaky breath. He never mentioned any of this. Alan gave a small, gentle smile. Robert worried you'd argue with him. He said you had a habit of putting other people's comfort above your own security. That sounded exactly like Dad. The man who triple-checked my tires every winter but pretended he didn't worry too much. Alan tapped the envelope. The letter will explain better than I can. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Dad's writing spilled across the page, steady and unmistakably his. Grace, if you're reading this, something in your life has reached a point where you need the truth more than my explanations. You have always given more than you take, especially in relationships. You trust too deeply and you forgive too easily. I don't want anyone talking you out of your future or convincing you that your security is theirs to spend. This trust is yours, not ours, not mine, yours. Use it when you need it. And if you're reading this, you probably need it. Love, Dad. My vision blurred. I pressed a shaking hand to my mouth, the paper rustling softly. Alan gave me a moment before clearing his throat gently. Grace, after your father passed, did anyone encourage you to consolidate accounts, roll things into joint funds, anything along those lines? My stomach clenched. Ethan mentioned it once. He said it would simplify paperwork if we put any leftovers from Dad into our joint account, but I told him there wasn't much left. And after that? Alan asked, though I sensed he already knew. He never brought it up again, I whispered. He took over the mail for a while, said he didn't want me dealing with sad paperwork. I thought he was helping. Alan nodded slowly. Your father anticipated that possibility. The trust is airtight. It can't be used as collateral for someone else's debt. It can't be split in a divorce. It cannot be claimed as marital property because it was never commingled. So Ethan can't touch it? Not legally, not financially, not even indirectly. He paused. You can use it to hire legal support, secure housing, rebuild whatever needs rebuilding. Humiliation crawled hot up my neck. I let him make me think I was terrible with money, I admitted, my voice cracking. He'd say my brain wasn't built for numbers, that I was too emotional to understand finances. And the stupid thing is, I manage books for 3 small businesses. I'm good at it. But when he said it, you believed him, Alan finished softly. I nodded. Shame and anger fought inside me. He leaned forward, his tone firm but not unkind. Grace, your father didn't just leave you money. He left you the means to walk away. That was his intent. The words hit like a steady weight settling into my spine, not crushing me, but holding me upright. I left Alan's office with a stack of copies, a business card tucked into my purse, and the envelope of my father's letter pressed close to my chest. Outside, the city noise felt sharper, clearer, almost like someone had turned up the volume on reality. I wasn't going back to Ethan to beg. I was going back to see just how deep his lies went. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. It steeled me. Ethan opened the door before I even knocked twice, like he'd been waiting, not for me, but for the moment he could perform annoyance. His eyes skimmed over my suitcase, the same one he'd thrown onto the porch, still scuffed along one edge. He smirked. Run out of charity couches already? For a second, I just stood there, letting his words hang between us, letting him believe I was still the woman who flinched at every jab, who apologized just to calm the air. He stepped aside with exaggerated generosity, waving me in like I was a stray cat he was doing a favor by sheltering. The living room looked exactly the same, but something in it felt warped, like stepping back into a dollhouse of my old life. His gaming console sprawled across the coffee table with tangled cords. My favorite blanket sat neatly folded on the arm of the couch, placed there like a guest's throw instead of something that used to belong across my legs every night. "Look," he said, shutting the door with a sigh heavy enough to suggest I'd inconvenienced him. "I just needed space, that's all. Maybe this little break taught you to respect who actually pays for this roof." He said it while strolling toward the kitchen, grabbing a drink from the fridge like we were picking up a conversation after a quiet weekend, not after he tossed me out with a half-zipped suitcase. In the past, I might have defended myself, tripped over explanations. Instead, I set my suitcase down and said calmly, "I went to the bank." His head jerked slightly. Barely noticeable, but I'd learned to catch micro flinches. His composure returned almost instantly, a lazy smile sliding into place. "Oh, that old thing?" he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Yeah, I asked about it once. Turns out it's nothing special." Nothing special. The account he'd tried to dig at like a dog scratching at buried treasure. The same account that could wipe out his debts 10 times over. "I saw the logs," I said, "of your inquiries, and I know the amount." The smile froze. His eyes sharpened, not angry yet, but calculating. Something oily slid behind them. "Well," he said after a beat, his voice tightening then smoothing out again, "I guess you're keeping secrets now. Funny how you accuse me of hiding things, but you run off and make big decisions about our future without me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was the wounded partner. "I'm your husband, Grace. Why wouldn't you trust me?" There it was. The flip. The twist. The gaslight he relied on like oxygen. I didn't respond. Silence made him twitch. He filled it quickly. "Look, we could fix everything. Seriously." He gestured vaguely, as if waving away the mess he created. "If you helped clear some of the debt, just a little bit, we could start over, build something real, or even invest in one of the company's side projects. That could be huge for us." Us. He said it like he hadn't thrown my life across a porch. I kept my voice even. The trust is mine, legally protected, and I've already spoken to a lawyer. There. A flash. Pure panic. It flickered across his face like a bulb blowing out, brief but unmistakable. Then he masked it with anger, the expression I knew too well. "So that's it?" he snapped. "You're just going to throw away our marriage over cash? Over money you didn't even earn?" I let him rant. Let him fill the house with all the noise he used to drown me out. My heartbeat stayed steady, anchored by something new inside me. Certainty. When he finally paused to breathe, I picked up my suitcase. "You threw me out first," I said quietly. He didn't expect that. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. As I reached the doorway, he shouted after me, voice cracking with the fear he wouldn't name. "You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, don't you dare come crawling back." I stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, nothing like the stale tension inside. For the first time in years, his words didn't hook into me. They slid right off, weightless. I closed the door gently. No slam, no drama, and felt something lighten in my chest. Because now I knew the truth. His threats were empty, and I could afford to be alone. The first time I saw the full list of Ethan's debts laid out in black and white, it felt like staring into the life of a stranger, except the stranger had eaten at every restaurant I'd begged him to skip, stayed at every hotel he'd said we couldn't afford, and called every reckless charge a business expense. I recognized everything, and it made me sick. We were in a small meeting room at the bank, the kind meant for quiet conversations and uncomfortable truths. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the morning light across the table in thin stripes. Marion sat beside me with her usual calm, her hands folded neatly, while a junior risk analyst, a nervous young guy named Neil, clicked through files on a shared monitor. "These are public records," he explained, tapping one of the screens. "And these," he said, switching windows, are credit reports you're entitled to view as his spouse. Spouse. The word felt ironic now, like calling two puzzle pieces a match when they never fit. I leaned forward as rows of numbers filled the screen. Card balances, loan statements, dates, multiple credit cards, several near their limits. A personal loan labeled investment venture. A line of credit tied to projected earnings from his company's development projects. Earnings that clearly never came. My stomach twisted. Ethan had been spending money he didn't have on a future he didn't control. Neil clicked again, opening a section of itemized transactions. Upscale bars, travel agencies, hotel suites, charges on nights he'd told me we could barely afford groceries, dates that matched weekends he claimed he had late project reviews and needed me to be supportive by staying home. The hypocrisy slid over my tongue like something metallic, bitter, cold, and old enough that I wondered how many years I'd swallowed it without noticing. Marion cleared her throat softly. "There's something else you should see, Grace." Neil opened another file, a log I recognized instantly as the same system Marion had shown me during the trust reveal. Except this time, the entries weren't about inquiries into my father's account. They were about Ethan's loan applications. And one particular note glowed like a warning flare. Included mention of potential family capital, Neil read. Possible access to private trust through spouse. My father's trust, my inheritance. The thing I didn't even know existed. "So he tried to use it as collateral?" I asked, my voice thinner than I meant. "Not explicitly," Marion said, "but he was implying stability, suggesting he had access to funds that could offset his risk profile. The bank didn't consider it valid since he wasn't a beneficiary and had no legal claim." She paused. "But he was trying." I pressed my palms together under the table, trying to anchor myself. The room felt warm. Too warm. Like someone had dialed up the thermostat while I wasn't looking. Alan had joined us by phone, his voice crisp through the speaker. "Grace," he said, "as long as you keep the trust separate, no shared accounts, no collateral agreements, no signatures, you're insulated. But if you'd use that money to help, you could have become liable for pieces of this." My cheeks burned, humiliation rising hot and choking. "I almost did," I whispered. "I almost believed him when he said I wasn't built to handle this stuff." Marion's expression tightened. "That's not uncommon. Financial gaslighting works because it sounds protective at first." "Grace," Alan added gently, "you weren't fragile. You were trusting. There's a difference." But trusting didn't feel noble. It felt foolish. It felt like standing in a room full of locked doors with the key in my pocket the whole time. The shame didn't stay shame for long. It curled in on itself, hardening into anger. Slow, simmering anger at Ethan for manipulating me and at myself for letting him shrink my confidence until I didn't think I had the right to look at our finances. I stared at the printouts in front of me, numbers that told the story of a man who gambled with our life and expected me to clean up the mess without ever seeing the mess. "So," I said finally, lifting my chin, "what's next?" Marion exchanged a glance with Neil, then looked back at me with something resolute in her eyes. "The bank can only do so much without escalating, but given the trust implications and the misrepresentations on his loan applications, we need a more formal setting." Alan's voice came through, steady as stone. "His employer should hear this, and the bank should be present. Ethan has been trying to play both sides of two worlds, yours and his company's. It's time those worlds hear the same truth." My pulse thudded in my ears, but not out of fear this time, out of clarity. I gathered the printouts, sliding them into the folder Marion had given me days ago. "Schedule it," I said. "I'll be there." Today I know that was the moment my humiliation stopped being a weight and started becoming a weapon. Ethan strutted into the conference room like he was about to charm a room full of interns. His shoulders were squared, smile rehearsed, tie a little too bright, like he'd picked it specifically to look successful. But the second his eyes landed on me, seated at the long glass table beside Marion and Alan, His expression flickered. Not enough for anyone else to catch it, but I saw it. A tiny, fractured second where confidence cracked into confusion. He hadn't expected me here. He certainly hadn't expected me to have a seat at the table. The room itself felt like it belonged in a corporate brochure. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a sleek black conference table that reflected the overhead lights, glass walls that made everything feel exposed. Marion sat at the head, composed as always, her hands neatly clasped. Alan sat beside me, a stack of organized documents in front of him. On the opposite side, Ethan's boss, Daniel Harrison, shook my hand politely, his expression politely neutral. He was tall, silvering at the temples, the kind of man used to dealing with numbers that affected skylines. Next to him sat a bank relationship manager, the one who handled Ethan's firm's development financing. He smiled, but it was tight around the edges, like he wasn't sure why he'd been pulled into this. Daniel turned to Marion. "So," he said with practiced ease, "I understand there's been a minor misunderstanding with some of Ethan's personal finances and how they intersect with our corporate risk disclosures." Minor misunderstanding. If only he knew. He looked back at me briefly, expecting, I could tell, a shy nod, maybe a few quiet words, something small and apologetic. Instead, I just met his gaze steadily. He blinked, slightly thrown off. Marion opened a folder. "Let's start with the trust," she said. Her voice filled the room effortlessly. "The Harris Family Trust is a private client account established by Robert Harris. It contains substantial holdings. The sole beneficiary is his daughter, Grace Miller." She motioned gently toward me. Ethan's jaw flexed. Marion continued, "This trust is legally insulated. Its funds are not marital property. They cannot be used as collateral, cannot be pledged against third-party debt, and cannot be included in risk assessment for loans tied to unrelated individuals or entities, including Mr. Miller." Daniel shifted in his chair, the first sign he was hearing something he didn't expect. Ethan leaned forward, chuckling nervously. "Well, I mean, we're a couple," he said, glancing at everyone like they should understand. "Grace and I make joint decisions, married decisions. It's not like I was claiming ownership or anything." Alan slid a stack of papers toward the center of the table, the sound crisp and final. "These," he said mildly, "are the bank logs of your past inquiries into the trust account. These," he added, placing another set beside them, "are your loan applications, where you implied access to family assets. Assets you had no legal or ethical right to reference." The bank relationship manager leaned in, eyes narrowing. He flipped through the papers quickly, his face paling by degrees. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Ethan," he said slowly, "did you imply to our lenders that you had personal access to additional capital? Capital tied to your wife's inheritance?" Ethan snapped upright. "I never said that. I just meant we had options. Grace and I talk about our finances all the time." I spoke before he could continue. My voice didn't shake. It didn't even waver. "That's not true." All eyes turned to me. Ethan actually froze, like he hadn't expected me to speak up at all. I kept going. "He threw me out of our home 2 days ago. I slept in a motel because I couldn't afford anywhere else. I used my father's old card because my debit card declined. That's how the bank found the trust in the first place." I could feel Ethan burning beside me, but I didn't look at him. He hid debts from me. He called me bad with money. He told me not to worry my little head about our accounts, all while trying to circle my inheritance behind my back. He's been using the idea of my father's money to bolster his image at work and with lenders. Silence settled heavy over the room, the kind that makes people's breathing audible. Daniel turned back to Ethan. "Is any of that true?" Ethan opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His face contorted into something between outrage and panic. The silence was answer enough. Marion closed her folder. To be absolutely clear, she said, the bank will not accept any arrangement in which Grace's trust is used as collateral, reassurance, leverage, or implication of stability for loans tied to Ethan Miller or his employer. The bank relationship manager nodded, visibly stiff. We'll need to review the firm's disclosures, he said quietly to Daniel. Daniel stood. We'll be reviewing Ethan's role at the company, he said with a calmness that had sharp edges. Effective immediately? Ethan snapped. This is ridiculous. Grace, tell them you're overreacting. I stood. No. Just that. No. And everything in the room shifted with it. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened, but because, for the first time in our marriage, I sat in the right chair. And he had no power left to take it from me. The attack started before I even made it home. My phone buzzed nonstop in the rideshare, vibrations rattling against the plastic cup holder like a trapped wasp. Ethan's name filled the screen again and again. Traitor, backstabber, ungrateful. His messages came in long, furious paragraphs, each one angrier than the last. He said I'd humiliated him in front of his boss, that I'd ruined his credibility, that I'd sided with strangers over my own husband. By the time I reached my temporary apartment, he'd already shifted tactics. Emotional attacks disguised as confessions. You embarrassed me. You ruined our chances of ever moving up. No man will ever trust you again after what you did today. Every sentence was meant to make me fold, to pull me back into the role I used to play. Quiet, apologetic, small, but I didn't respond. Not yet. By midweek, the smear campaign had fully launched. A mutual friend, someone neutral enough to still text me, sent a screenshot. Just wanted you to know what he's saying at the office, she wrote. Below it, Ethan holding court in the break room, claiming I had stolen money from my father, painting himself as the poor husband saddled with a selfish wife who refused to help him when he needed her most. He'd flipped the narrative so quickly it almost impressed me. Almost. At the same time, whispers spread among his co-workers. Crazy wife. Overdramatic. Blew up his career. People who'd never spoken to me felt comfortable defining me. My fingers trembled when I typed my first reply to someone who'd asked directly what was going on. All actions taken on the advice of legal counsel and backed by documented facts. That was it. Clean. Controlled. I didn't need to convince anyone of anything. The people who mattered. Jenna, my mom's old friend who checked in weekly, the clients who trusted me with their bookkeeping, didn't push for details. When they asked if I was okay, I gave them honest pieces, not the painful whole. He hid things, I said. He lied about money. I'm handling it. And they believed me. Midweek, Marion sent a discreet email update. Ethan's access to certain client-facing systems had been temporarily reduced pending review. Corporate language for, he's on thin ice and everyone knows it. Then Daniel's assistant called. Her voice was polite, clipped. Mr. Miller has been reassigned to non-strategic duties. Should you need anything further documented for legal purposes, please let us know. Non-strategic duties. For Ethan, that might as well have been exile. A week earlier, that news would have made me sick with guilt. Now, it didn't even surprise me. People who build their careers on illusions forget what happens when the lights turn on. At night, instead of doom scrolling through Ethan's social media or reading the little barbs he reposted about disloyal women, I opened my laptop. I spread out a notebook, a cheap pen, and a cup of chamomile tea. And Jenna sat cross-legged on my tiny couch, helping me sketch out ideas for something I hadn't dared imagine for myself. Grace Harris Financial Services. My name, not his, just mine. A bookkeeping and money education business for women who'd been told they were bad with money. Women who were talked over at the dinner table. Women who had been tricked into believing they weren't smart enough to read their own bank statements. I wrote tagline ideas while Jenna played with fonts on Canva, the soft tap of keys, the hum of the refrigerator, warm lamplight spilling onto the page. It felt like reclaiming oxygen. On Friday night, Ethan sent one last message, a final attempt to claw back control. "You'll regret this when you're broke and I'm back on top." Once that threat would have tied my stomach in knots. This time, I just stared at it. Then I pressed mute. No anger, no guilt, just clarity. I had a trust, I had a plan, and I had my father's handwriting in a letter telling me he believed I'd need it someday. Today I know he was right. Not about the danger, but about my strength. The day the divorce papers were served, I wasn't there to see it, but the story made its way back to me within the hour. A mutual friend texted, "You're not going to believe this. Ethan just got served. I watched from my car." Then another ding. He yelled at the process server for like 5 minutes, waving the envelope like it was fake. I pictured it clearly. The same expression he'd worn in the bank conference room, shock wrapped in indignation, like the world had personally betrayed him, like I had personally betrayed him by refusing to keep shrinking. Apparently, he kept shouting, "This is a joke, right? She wouldn't actually do this," as though my entire existence had always revolved around what he believed I would or wouldn't dare. But then the envelope stayed in his hand, and the truth stayed in his face. Mediation was 3 weeks later, a beige room with fluorescent lighting and a conference table that had seen too many exhausted couples gripping pens like weapons. Ethan walked in with the swagger of a man who thought he'd negotiate from a place of power. His posture collapsed just slightly when he saw Alan sitting beside me, calm and prepared. He recovered quickly, though. "All right," he said, exhaling like he was being generous. "I want half the trust, half the house and spousal support, since her rich dad helped her more than my parents ever helped me." The mediator, a patient woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain, lifted an eyebrow but said nothing. Alan didn't even glance at me when he responded. "The trust is non-marital and legally insulated. The house was purchased with Ms. Miller's premarital savings and maintained with her income. And given Mr. Miller's higher earning potential and his documented financial misconduct, the court is more likely to award her support than the other way around." Ethan's mouth hung open, then sputtering. "You're weaponizing the law. You're twisting everything. This is what gold digger ex-wives do." "Mr. Miller," the mediator warned gently, making another note on her pad. He threw his hands up. "This is ridiculous. She's entitled to nothing without me. I built our life." I stared at my hands, feeling nothing and everything at once. The old version of me might have cried, might have apologized, might have believed him, but I wasn't her anymore. Negotiations stretched on, slow and procedural, papers rustling, ballpoint pens clicking, Ethan huffing every 2 minutes. His indignation slowly fizzled into resignation as reality settled like wet cement. By the end, the agreement was clear. He would keep his retirement accounts, his personal belongings. I would keep the house. My trust, my small but growing business, completely free of his reach. He would pay a modest court-enforced amount of support for a defined period. Nothing dramatic, nothing punitive, just legal acknowledgement of the imbalance he'd created. When he finally realized this was the best outcome he'd get, something in him deflated. His shoulders slumped. His voice lost its bite. For the first time, he wasn't performing. As we walked out of the mediation office, he stopped beside me at the elevator. His tone came out low, bitter. "You've turned into him, you know," he said. "Your father, cold, numbers-obsessed, heartless." The elevator doors slid open, a soft mechanical sigh cutting the air between us. I stepped inside, turned just enough to meet his eyes, and said, "I should be so lucky." Because for the first time, those words weren't an insult. They were a compliment. My father loved me enough to leave me the means to walk away, and I finally loved myself enough to use them. The first paying client I ever had walked into my tiny rented office holding a latte and a spiral notebook decorated with stickers. She looked nervous, hands fidgeting with her sleeve, eyes darting around the room like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "I'm sorry if this is weird," she said as she sat down, but I overheard someone at a coffee shop call you the woman whose husband underestimated her. And I figured if you survived that, you might have something to teach me. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time someone had framed my trauma as expertise. But I nodded, opened a clean notebook, and said, "Tell me what you're struggling with." And just like that, my business had its first heartbeat. The office I'd rented was small, barely big enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf. But it sat above a bakery that started baking at 4 a.m. Every morning, the hallway filled with the smell of coffee, cinnamon rolls, and warm yeast. It made the place feel hopeful, like a fresh start rising in the air. I painted the walls a soft sage green, the color of calm. I hung a framed photo of my dad on the shelf behind my desk. Not a dramatic portrait, just a candid shot of him laughing at a picnic. Every time I looked at it, I felt steadier, like he was quietly approving every choice I made. Jenna helped me with everything else. She worked on my logo for hours. Something simple, clean, trustworthy. Grace Harris Financial. She built my website from scratch, typing copy while sprawled across my couch. "Perfect," she murmured as she edited. "This part, for women who've been told they're bad with money, that's your audience." And she was right. My services weren't flashy. Basic bookkeeping, budgeting sessions, debt strategies, hand-holding through credit reports, explanations of things banks purposely make complicated. The kinds of skills that seemed mundane until you realized no one had ever taught them, especially not to women who'd been silenced, dismissed, or financially manipulated. My next few clients were friends of friends. A single mom trying to start a home bakery in her cramped kitchen. A teacher drowning in student loans she'd avoided opening emails about. A nurse who confessed she'd never checked her retirement account because Ethan types in her life always told her she'd mess it up. Each time I sat across from someone and showed them how to track expenses, or how to create a debt snowball, or how to find a stray $100 they didn't know they had, something inside me stitched itself back together. Helping them helped me. Soon the whispers turned into referrals. Not just, "She's good with numbers," but, "She stood up to a banker husband and won." Women came to me with shaky voices and long stories, some crying before we even began. They weren't just seeking financial advice, they were seeking permission to stop being afraid. I always told them the truth. My dad gave me a head start, but the real power didn't come from the money. It came from deciding to stop letting someone else define what I was capable of. And I meant it. As the months passed, the trust became less of a lifeline and more like a safety net. My business covered my basic expenses now, slowly but steadily. I reinvested carefully. No risks, no splurges, no reckless leaps, nothing that resembled the financial chaos Ethan had called big opportunities. I kept my receipts organized. I tracked every dollar. Stability became my rebellion. One evening, after my last client left and the bakery downstairs had gone quiet for the night, I sat at my desk and closed my laptop on a finished monthly report. The room glowed gold from the small lamp in the corner. Outside, cars hissed along the street, their lights streaking across my window. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and then it hit me. I had gone an entire day, 8 full hours, without thinking once about what Ethan was doing, who he was blaming, or how he was spinning his story. My life had finally stopped orbiting his chaos. It was following my plans now, my choices, my voice. Today I know that was the moment I truly stepped into the life my father wanted for me, not protected by his money, but strengthened by his belief. The headline didn't even earn the top of the business page. It sat halfway down, squeezed between a real estate forecast and an article about rising lumber costs. Local developer under scrutiny after risky side deals surface. At first, I didn't recognize the photo. It was just Daniel's office building, glass catching the morning sun. But then I saw the name in the second paragraph, Ethan Miller. My stomach didn't drop. It didn't twist. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just went still, the way a pond goes still when the wind stops. I clicked the article. The details were vague at first. Phrases like unauthorized pitches, misrepresentation of resources, minor investors expressing concern. But I could read between the lines. Ethan had finally run out of places to hide his lies, and the spotlight was catching everything he'd once kept in the shadows. Over the next weeks, the story grew teeth. Emails surfaced, ones he'd sent to potential investors, hinting that he had family capital available to support projects, that he had private banking connections ready to step in, that he had liquid options through his spouse. Me. He meant me. And he'd said all of that at a time when I was counting coins in my car for fast food. Regulators got involved. A few smaller investors filed complaints. The bank, already cautious after witnessing the disaster up close during the trust meeting, handed over every relevant email, every log, every scrap of documentation. Daniel issued a public statement, crisp and cold. These activities were independent actions by an employee. Harrison and Vail did not authorize or support these side projects. Ethan went from non-strategic duties to no duties at all, quietly let go. No announcements, no farewell post on LinkedIn, no moving on to new opportunities caption, just gone. A mutual acquaintance messaged me late one night. He's freaking out, says you set him up, says if you had just played along, none of this would have happened. I didn't respond. His chaos finally had consequences that weren't addressed to my doorstep. Then the court notices came. He had fallen behind on his support payments. Not surprising. He'd once called the whole process paperwork games, like laws were optional if he found them boring. Now those same games were garnishing what little income he scraped together from odd jobs. His arrogance had always been louder than his math. Rumors trickled in from people who knew people. He'd moved into a cramped shared apartment, sold his car, started showing up at bars complaining loudly about unfair judges and conniving exes. The more he talked, the fewer people stuck around to listen. Once you know the full story, the performance loses its shine. One afternoon, I opened the business page again to follow up on the investigation. A new line had been added to the original article. Mr. Miller declined to comment. I read it twice. There was no triumph in it, no spark of revenge-fueled satisfaction, just a slow, settling relief in the quiet of my kitchen, sunlight slipping across my countertop, my tea cooling beside me. His story was finally untangling itself from mine. I closed the browser and leaned back in my chair, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It wasn't joy in his suffering. It wasn't vindication. It was the realization that his spiral was no longer my responsibility. His consequences weren't my burden. His downfall wasn't my disaster. My father's boundaries, those documents, those safeguards, that quiet, steady love, had done exactly what he built them to do. They protected me. Today I know that walking away wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a life where Ethan's chaos no longer had a claim on me. The first time I set the new welcome mat down, my welcome mat with my name and nobody else's, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the trust, or the lawyer, or the bank meetings. It was the simple fact that I stayed. I stayed in the home Ethan thought he owned with his ego alone. I stayed, and he didn't. The letters on the mat looked almost too bold against the porch. Grace Miller, no, and Ethan. No shared monogram, just me. When I stepped inside, the house felt different, like it had taken a deep breath after holding one for years. I opened windows that had stayed shut during half our marriage and let sunlight spill across the hardwood floors. Then I got to work. I repainted the bedroom a soft, warm ivory. The color made the space feel like morning even at dusk. I replaced the old bed, the one Ethan had insisted was fine, despite the creak that woke me every time he rolled over, with one that didn't hold a single memory of fighting freezing silence or apologizing in the dark. The wedding photos came down one by one. Each frame left a faint square on the wall, a ghost of who I had tried to be. In their place, I hung landscapes my dad loved. Quiet lakes, Mountains with fog resting low, a field of sunflowers that always made him smile. Jenna added a few prints she made herself, with little quotes she knew I needed. Your future is not a negotiation. Grace is a direction, not just a name. The house slowly shifted from a stage where Ethan performed superiority into a home where I finally lived. A few weeks later, I invited friends over for a small dinner. Nothing fancy. Pasta, salad, cheap wine we pretended was expensive. Sitting in the dining room where Ethan once lectured me about being bad with money, I felt an almost electric reversal. No raised voice, no condescension, just laughter, conversations about freelance rates, emergency savings goals, bad bosses, and the thrill of getting paid on time. It hit me. The room wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't waiting for him to judge anything. My business grew in slow, steady arcs, just the way I liked it. Some clients paid the full rate. Some paid what they could. A few bartered services, a haircut here, a website fix there, homemade meals that saved me time on long workdays. I tracked every dollar carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect. For myself, for the women who trusted me, for the future I was building with intention instead of desperation. When Marion called to invite me to speak at a Women and Money evening at the bank, I froze for a moment. Me? Standing in front of a room, teaching others about budgeting? But the night arrived, and I zipped myself into a blazer I bought with my card from my income. Standing under the soft, professional lighting of the bank's meeting space, facing a group of women who looked exactly like I had once felt, worried, intimidated, hopeful, I felt something settle warmly in my spine. My dad would have loved this. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, steady, proud. I kept my story gentle. Outlines, not wounds. Enough to show them that money didn't have to be a mystery and that no one deserved to feel small just because someone else found power in confusion. His old bank card still lives in my wallet. Not because I need it, not because it opens any account anymore, but because it reminds me that my father believed in my strength long before I learned how to. The panic that card once caused, that motel lobby, that flickering fluorescent light, is gone, replaced by calm, by clarity. Late one night, after taking out the trash, I closed the front door and paused in the quiet entryway. The house didn't echo. It didn't vibrate with tension. It didn't carry the aftertaste of arguments. No angry footsteps pacing. No voice calling me ungrateful. No cold silence stretching across the living room. Just my breath, steady, soft, mine, and the faint ticking of a clock I bought myself, a sound that used to terrify me because time reminded me of everything slipping away. Now it just marks the life I rebuilt, one quiet, determined moment at a time. Sometimes, without warning, the motel lobby flashes back into my mind. The buzzing fluorescent light, the smell of old carpet and fryer grease, the clerk barely looking up before muttering, "Card declined." I can still feel the weight of my father's old card in my palm, cool and worn at the edges. I remember thinking it was nothing but a sentimental scrap. Useful to everyone but myself. It feels like a lifetime ago, like remembering someone else's humiliation, not my own. Now I sit at my kitchen table, a mug of tea warming my fingers. My laptop is closed after finishing another month of reports for a client. Outside, the street is quiet except for a dog barking down the block and the faint hum of a car passing. The house around me, my house, is silent in a way that used to terrify me. Back then, silence meant something was wrong. Something was brewing. Someone was angry. Now it just means peace, breathing room, a life that fits. I lean back in my chair and think about her, the woman I used to be. The one who stood on her porch as her husband threw her out like trash. The one who believed she had nothing. No money, no choices, no right to question the man draining her dry. I wish I could reach back and touch her shoulder. I wish I could tell her she wasn't cheap or dramatic or bad with money. She was just taught to shrink until she forgot how to take up space. I take a sip of tea and let the warmth settle in my chest. The truth is, even if my father hadn't left me a trust, I still would have deserved to leave that night. The money made the path easier, yes. It gave me leverage. It gave me time. But the decision, the moment I stepped away from the lies I'd been swallowing for years, that came from somewhere deeper than any account balance. The bank panicked because a dormant system woke up. I panicked because a dormant part of me woke up. What shocked me wasn't the number on the screen. It was realizing that the woman my father believed I could be, the one he planned for, protected, trusted, was stronger than the woman I had allowed myself to become. Somewhere off stage, Ethan's life continues. Job searches, side hustles, boasts that don't land the way they used to, complaints half believed even by the people who hear them. I don't track his updates. I don't check his social media. I don't ask mutual friends for news. The best revenge was never watching him fall. It was watching myself rise. I finish my tea and stand stretching my arms. The house settles softly, wood creaking in that familiar, comforting way. On my way to my bag, I glance at the small wallet on the counter. My father's old card peeks from the side slot. I pick it up. It doesn't scare me anymore. It doesn't hold secrets anymore. Now it's just a symbol, a memory of the moment everything changed. I slide it back into the wallet, smiling faintly. I don't need to use it again. But if I ever lose my nerve, or doubt my worth, or hear echoes of Ethan's voice in my head, I know exactly what to do. Walk into the room that scares me. Ask for the truth in writing, and choose my future over anyone else's fear. Today I know the card didn't open an account. It opened me.